This podcast is supported by gossip lovers like you. If you want to get access to 2 extra episodes every month, you can join our Patreon over at patreon.com/corporate gossip. We have a really fun group of gossip goblins over there in the snark lair, where in addition to extra episodes that aren't posted on the main feed, we also post more pictures from our main feed episodes, and we add juicy details that were cut for timer just because they were too spicy. And we answer your questions about every episode. So join us over at patreon.com/corporate gossip. This podcast would not be possible without your support. So thank you.
Tonight, it's a corporate gossip after-school special. Tattletale, when to narc on a friend. We meet Emma, a star Bay Area lacrosse player who discovers her best friend has a secret that could jeopardize the whole team.
Dad, can I talk to you?
Not now, honey. I'm picking out adult diapers for Sergey Brin's baby shower.
It's important.
Ugh. Okay, what is it, honey?
Dad, I found this in Madison's backpack today.
Okay. This is a USB drive, honey, and actually, I think it's a good thing that you keep your crypto so close to your...
It's a Juul, and she's addicted to it, Dad. Everyone on my lacrosse team is. They smoke them all the time. In class, before practice. They all think these things are safer than cigarettes, but I've heard about kids who end up in the hospital because of these things.
Are you f***ing kidding? I spend $50,000 a year to send you to this school with a bunch of deadbeat drug addicts?
I was thinking you could just call Madison's mom and explain to her
Call Madison's mom? No. Gross. I have a better idea. I'm gonna message the CEO of Juul right now. On LinkedIn. Dear Mr. Burns, I just wanted to let you know that your stupid f***ing company has gotten my teenage kids' friends hooked on nicotine. From here on out, I'm going to go out of my way to fight the bullshit that you all are doing there. I have deep ties in the investment world, and am from Washington, D.C., and have ties there, all of which I will leverage to the max. I hope you feel really good about making a lot of money for yourselves. Signed, Peter Bridger, founder, Fortress Investments, period. Oh, I bet this Burns guy is going to call me up any minute now. I run one of the biggest private equity firms in this neighborhood. He's not going to want to ignore me.
Well, I really think we should, talk to the other girls on the team about the dangers of vaping, or maybe we could...
Oh, honey, no need for that. Daddy's got it all under... Did he just leave me on red?
This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast, Juul, Puff Daddies. Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA scorned Becca Platsky. I'm here with my brother and my co-host,
Data Analytics Playboy Adam Platsky,
and producer Mike. So today we're talking about Juul, Camel Cools for millennials. We should have gotten one for science, for research. The founders of Juul did what every single-celled business-amoeba-boy dreamed of doing, but was too wussy to actually commit to doing. They made smoking cool again. They reversed decades of efforts to reduce smoking in young people and turned millions of kids that otherwise would never have smoked a traditional cigarettes into nicotine-dependent freakazoids. Ka-ching! Founders of Juul, I'm going to put them on the screen right now. Adam Bowen on the left and James Monsees founded Juul after meeting on smoke breaks while they were at Stanford University in 2004 studying product design. And although now we know what happened in the end, in the beginning, these two had a good idea. what if we came up with a nicotine replacement device that still felt like smoking, still gave you that nicotine kick, but it didn't come with the cancerous materials in a traditional cigarette, and it didn't have that taboo kind of social shame that came with smoking. They didn't want to quit smoking. They just wanted to reduce harm and avoid that social stigma. And they pitched their idea to their professors for Plume, which was like an early iteration of Juul. And then they went full on Adderall brain, all gas, no brakes. They were obsessed with bringing this thing to market. They called it, quote, one of the greatest opportunities for public health in the history of mankind. That probably is said at Stanford like once a day.
It's a syllabus note.
After their pitch, their professors kind of grabbed them by the suspenders and they said, whoa, slow down there, you little punks. You can't just disrupt the tobacco industry. There's like a lot of stuff that happened before you got here. Why don't you start by reading a book? So they sent him over to the University of California, San Francisco, or UCSF, to study the history of big tobacco. So let's join them there.
When I did research, I read some of the same anecdotes. It sounds like you did, and it was like these two guys. You could already see the movie being made, right? These two guys who were taking their smoke breaks outside the famed Stanford Design Center, and they're like, "Hey, you smoke? I smoke too. Let's be friends." And then over a love for cigarettes, they started being ostracized by their friends. And they were like, well, I love smoking, but my fingies smell. There must be a better way. And that's the way this story goes.
It's funny, so far with there's a lot of bullying that happens in our episode so far. We had Google Glass in the last episode with people being bullied for wearing those and people being bullied for smoking cigarettes. You know what? Sometimes bullying is good and it helps you make the right decisions in life, like not wearing Google Glass and not smoking. By the way, for research for this episode, Adam read Lauren Etter's The Devil's Playbook, Big Tobacco, Juul, and the Addiction of a New Generation. Though I reminded Adam to bring his book, I did not bring my book. I read Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul by Jamie Ducarme.
And for my research, I went through 3 Juul cartridges in one day.
How do you feel?
I don't know where I'm at.
And there's also a Netflix documentary. I didn't watch it, but I heard it was very good. So let's join Adam and James at the founders of Juul at the UCSF library for corporate gossip number 1, which is Big Tobacco's villain arc. So we start at UCSF because it's like the origins of Big Tobacco's flop era. So back in 1994, an anonymous source called Mr. Butts, which I think was a reference to a Doonesbury cartoon, if you're old enough to know what that is, sent several FedEx boxes full of thousands of confidential tobacco industry documents to journalists and researchers and professors, including those at UCSF. Mr. Butts worked for a tobacco company called Brown & Williamson's. They made Pall Mall, Lucky Strike, Cool, and they were getting really disturbed at the way that the company was blatantly marketing its products to kids. And this, I think it's a guy, but guy or gal, started sneaking documents home with them to photocopy and send out. And regulators already had their eyes at the time on Big Tobacco, but the documents were their smoking gun.
Boom.
According to the professor at UCSF, the documents showed that, quote, 30 years ago, the tobacco industry knew 30 years before 1994, so, in the mid-60s, the tobacco industry knew that nicotine was an addictive substance and that it caused cancer, and it showed that they withheld this information from the public. 2 years later, so 1996, attorneys general from 46 states, 5 territories, and D.C. reached a landmark settlement with cigarettes companies, including Brown & Williamson, Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, and others. It is still, to this day, the largest civic settlement in U.S. history. Almost 30 years ago, the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, or the Tobacco MSA. $206 billion. Just to put it in perspective, if you divided that by the number of people living in the U.S. at the time, everyone would have gotten $1,000, which is $2,000 in today's money, which is insane amount of money. And maybe you're too young to remember the settlement, but you might remember those Truth commercials. Do you guys remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was an organization born from the tobacco MSA. Included a picture of that one very famous advertisement. And this is actually right down the street. It was filmed at Pershing Square in New York City, where they had like body bags representing the number of people that died of smoking. And I remember that ad very well. So the founders of Juul, Adam and James, as we're going to call them, were 23 and 19 respectively when the tobacco MSA was reached. And clearly the truth campaigns did not work on them, because by 2004, when they met Stanford at 29 and 25, they were both smoking. So the documents that they were reading from the archives of Mr. Butts must have totally scared them straight, right? They read the settlement agreement, $206 billion in 1998. They must have looked at each other, completely pale-faced and was like, oh my God, like, we cannot make the mistakes of the past. Like, we cannot market this super addictive nicotine product to kids. You guys aren't going to market it to kids, right? That's what you learned, right? You went to Stanford, for fuck's sakes. Unfortunately, they had developed a condition that would prevent them from applying lessons of the past to the current state. That condition is called silliconvalleyitis. Prevention is widely available. You just have to touch grass. But if left untreated, it can cause delusions of grandeur, severe confirmation bias, and frostbite due to an over-reliance on branded fleece vests with no overcoats. Signs of silliconvalleyitis include statements like, our product is one of the greatest opportunities for public health in the history of mankind. And if you encounter somebody with silliconvalleyitis, silliconvalleyitis, do not give them money. This can exacerbate their condition, which is contagious.
So I think when Adam and James started this, I think they had a noble cause. And I think they did think that the product could save a portion of the world. I don't think the goal was obviously to addict a new generation. I think, all right, there's got to be a better way. And we can come up with something that gives you nicotine but doesn't give you the carcinogens. And at the time, that was a much better alternative, right? But it sounds like you don't think they were as noble as I do.
I don't think that their initial intention was to get an entire new generation hooked on nicotine. But given the fact that they had access, unfettered and like very unique access to primary source documents outlining the exact playbook that these big tobacco companies used to market to kids, and then they knew the consequences, and then they went ahead and just repeated that playbook. It's not necessarily that they went out there with ill intent, but like, at what point does negligence just do the same thing? Like, what does it matter what their intention was or not? They knew what was wrong. They did what was wrong. So I don't really care what their intent was.
Right. Well, they also eventually, it made sense because they were doing like flavored Juuls, such as like a Pediasure. Like, I think that's where it really starts to kind of fall apart for their argument.
Once you start having tricks flavored Juuls. So, like many with silliconvalleyitis, James and Adam didn't know that they had been afflicted. So when they sent out a fundraising email to the heavily infected Stanford alumni listserv, quote, announcing an exciting new opportunity to invest in a product in the high growth industry of smoking alternatives, and pitched a product that would help smokers quit traditional cigarettes with no research to back it up, they were pleased to receive very quickly $150,000 initial funding from their first investor.
So you're not giving them enough credit here, though, because at this point, the tobacco companies for a long time had been playing with the pH levels, which will give you a better head high. Mm-hmm. So the higher the pH will result in a better effect. So that head rush that you've gotten if you've hit a cigarette, and what you typically are chasing. The problem is when you get to that higher pH level, it creates a harsher drag. So like an unfiltered cigarette or like your first hit of weed, you're like coughing and it's not pleasant. What they wanted to understand was the science of inhalation, how they could achieve higher pH levels to achieve that head rush without getting that harsh hit, that cough. And that's kind of where the idea came from, and that's why the science held weight. So they did have some research. They didn't have a product, but the idea was there. $150,000 worth at least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I think they absolutely did science to figure out how to make a better e-cigarette. Like, there was e-cigarettes out there at the time. Remember those ones that looked like actual cigarettes? They were white and then they had like the red thing on the end that made it look like a cigarette, but it didn't give people that nicotine high, that head high that you're talking about that you get from a traditional cigarette. So what they were making, it made total sense. Like, I'm not saying at all that it was a bad idea. I actually think had they gone out after it and just done tobacco and just done menthol, which is what the FDA and regulators had wanted them to do, they probably could have created a middle of the road, like decently successful, sustainable company that provides a smoking cessation opportunities for, 30, 40, 50-year-olds who want to stop smoking.
Maybe I'm just old school, but I still believe in the mantra, you got to cough to get off. So it wasn't necessarily targeted at me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You got to cough more. It gets you higher.
I mean, a lot of people didn't switch to Juul for that reason.
And I have friends that quit smoking. Lifetime smokers quit smoking because of Juul.
Because of Juul, yeah.
So
I certainly
it did work for some people, but
But how many people do you know
yeah.
that started smoking because of Juul or started
I don't hang out
juuling?
with enough kids, but if I did, I probably would know more.
Right. So let's go back to their investment. They got $150,000 from the Stanford alumni listserv. And, another symptom of siliconvalleyitis is FOMO. And the general rule of Silicon Valley is once you get one angel investor, the rest just throw themselves at you because they do not want to miss out. They got one big investment from Nicholas Pritzker. Does that last name sound familiar to anybody? That's the cousin of Illinois Governor J.D. Pritzker, who was at the DNC famously, weirdly, right after Bernie Sanders this year. They are both heirs to the Hyatt fortune. By the end of the story, by the way, Nicholas Pritzker would invest $1 billion in Juul.
It's a lot of sausages.
So with all that money, Adam and James are ready for the next step. Let's say it together. A quirky open floor plan office in a warehouse in the Bay Area. Here it is. Here's Juul. There's dogs on the floor, so it's a fun place to work.
Yeah, I don't like workplaces where they let dogs in. Oops.
So, can I be honest? I think that this part is what really gets startup founders from the late aughts going. Like, we talked about this briefly in the SBF FTX episode, but I think ultimately they just want to build a startup so they can sign a lease and develop a company culture and value statements and traditions. And they just want to be mayors of their own little frat house villages. And I think that's like what us millennials wanted at the time too. It didn't matter if we were working for like a glorified subleasing agency like WeWork, or a listicle factory like BuzzFeed, or a company that gets kids hooked on nicotine. We bought into whatever purpose statement they were selling because we wanted to live amongst the hip villagers. Working in a frat house is fun when you're in your 20s. I think ultimately most of these guys liked the idea of founding a company more than they liked actually doing it. And I think that plays out in Juul's case. Adam was initially the CEO, but he was quickly removed by the investors and replaced with James, because Adam couldn't put together a financial statement, and the board was, quote, increasingly frustrated with the virtually unusable information that he was bringing to meetings. I really wish I had more details on this one. Like, was he just pulling up white guys wearing Google Glass Tumblr page? Like, what was going on? Like, you went to Stanford and you can't show up to a meeting prepared? Ay. So let's move to corporate gossip number 2, shall we? Corporate gossip number 2 is Juul's founders take part in a Silicon Valley pastime, wasting money and making things worse. So, Adam and Mike, have you guys ever Juuled? And what did you like about it or not like about it?
I Juuled, and I've done all the other brands as well, or a lot of the other brands. What I liked about it was you get that kick. You can get and you can get a way bigger rush than any cigarette, in my opinion, which I liked. I also loved the cool factor. No, that's the part I hated, was that you looked like an idiot because there was like a giant battery pack. It's like you were smoking out of a
USB.
a brick. Yeah, it just felt like you'd hide it under your hand or something because you didn't want people to know, or at least I did.
Not me. I love juuling. I remember I was 25 when I tried a Juul, and I went home and bought one right away. and I ordered it online. But I only vape socially, because I would smoke cigarettes socially, but I never bought I bought a pack of cigarettes once when I was in high school, but I never made it through them. But I never was in my adult life. I never was in love enough to buy something. So this is the first time I ever bought a tobacco product with my own money. You know.
What? Why do you think you didn't get hooked?
I got hooked on other things.
You had other stuff going on?
Yeah, I had bigger fish to fry than vape.
Yeah, I've never bought a Juul. I've definitely vaped before, but I don't know if I'm just dumb, but I never got the head rush for cigarettes or vapes.
Dummy can't inhale.
I guess not.
Well, I don't know if you're doing it right.
I don't think you're doing it right.
I do smoke a cigarette drunk.
You smoke it
from
through your
time to
nose,
time.
right?
Well, I just light up the whole I smoke like Herb Kelleher. But Adam, it sounds like you were not a smoker before. You didn't use it as a mechanism to quit smoking. When you started Juul,
I used it as a mechanism to pick up smoke.
Yeah. And that was the big problem with Juul. Like, even though company executives would tell you that this product was made for smokers to quit smoking, anecdotally, most people are realizing that people are picking up these products who were not smokers in the first place. And the idea was that their product was safer than smoking because it delivered the addictive nicotine without the tar and carcinogens in a traditional combustible cigarette, which might be true. But if you end up getting non-smokers, especially young non-smokers, hooked on nicotine where they otherwise wouldn't have, that's not really a net positive. And at this point in 2013, so I'm 23, you're 20, and we are part of this, thanks to a lot of efforts from the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, smoking rates in the U.S. had fallen to 17.8%. And I can say, in 2013, barely any of my friends smoked. I think I knew a small handful of people that smoked. If it had been 50 years earlier, most of our friends would have been smoking, right? So it had fallen to a little under 18% of adults from 25% 20 years prior, and even more, 30 years before that. Youth smoking was down even further, 15.7% from 30% 20 years prior. This is data from the American Lung Association. So when you look at those trends, like if the founders of Juul had really wanted people to stop smoking, they could have just done nothing. But I don't know. I didn't go to Stanford.
Bars. Nice.
Instead, what they did do was introduce a product into an already growing e-cigarette marketplace that delivered in one vape the nicotine equivalent of smoking 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes. If you bought a Juul, you also wouldn't necessarily know how powerful the vape was. This is from the book Big Vape. Quote, "We would never use the word addictive," said one sales rep. We would say it was strong. We would say it was satisfying. And the subtext, of course, was that Juul would keep customers coming back. Nicotine dependence is a very good business model.
It makes you wonder, like, are these people selling this stuff? Like, these people are just actively, we're going to get these people addicted immediately. Like, they go home every day, make dinner, and they're like, yeah, I'm fine.
Look, here's what I think it's like. I know a lot of really progressive people who talk a lot about unions and talk a lot about workers' rights, and they still use Amazon, right? And I think that is very prevalent in our society right now because you can really separate yourself from the people that you sell to or buy from because of the internet. You don't have to go see the people. You don't have to go to the Amazon factory and see it with your own eyes. All you see is you open up the door and there's a package there. So you can have this level of cognitive dissonance. And I think the same thing is true for Juul. A lot of these people, for the time being, didn't have kids that were hooked on nicotine. A lot of these people didn't necessarily see the effects of young kids smoking. All they saw was dollar signs. And that's the other thing. For my friends who are really progressive but still use Amazon, they don't care because it's easy and convenient. And it requires a lot of diligence to live by your values. And unfortunately for Adam and James, this is where I kind of come back and say, I don't think they had very strong values, because if they did, they would have started to see these things and be like, hey, this is not a good thing. Like, let's pivot. No money is worth killing kids. But whatever. I mean, and here's the thing.
Teens fucking loved Juul. According to the CDC, e-cigarette use among high school students increased from 1.5% in 2011 to 21% in 2018. That 21% is 3 million students using vapes in 2018. And among middle schoolers, so what, 11 to 14? In that same time frame, it increased from 6% to almost 5% of middle schoolers.
0.6%.
Sorry, 0.6% to almost 5% of middle schoolers. Students could take the smoke device into school and blow smoke into their backpacks. It's easy to get around the Juul age restrictions on the website, and gas stations, as we know, would regularly sell products with an age restriction to kids without an ID.
You know, it wasn't just middle schools either. I was living in San Francisco from 2015 to 2019, and if you were living there with me, you experienced the same thing. At the time, it was like post-grad years, so I spent a lot of time with tech sales bros. Mm-hmm. And I remember I saw a couple emails and Slacks that companies had sent out internal communications that vaping was not allowed in the office.
Wow.
So you would just see like groups of 20-somethings outside like the Salesforce tower vaping. It was just crazy. It was like it was this community of vaping, and it was extremely dystopian.
Well, I'll tell you, like, that's one of the things about smoking is it's a social activity. It's an opportunity to take a break from whatever you're doing and just shoot the shit. And who doesn't love that? Mm-hmm. If there was like, hey, once every 3 hours, you can go outside for 20 minutes and make a boondoggle, I would be there in a minute. But there's not a ton of opportunities in the workday to take a certified shoot the shit break.
What does Kelly Kapoor say? She's like, I think it's bullshit that people take smoke breaks. I'll take up smoking. I will. I want the breaks.
Yeah. Juul wasn't the only e-cigarette manufacturer. We chose them for this podcast because they're the most juicy, but brands like Enjoy, which was owned by Philip Morris, which is now known as Altria, and Blue, without the E, were on the market as well. And they also had some pretty kid-friendly flavors like chocolate treat and cherry crush.
And Mama's apple juice.
I was going to say breast milk.
Breast milk.
Well, that you can span the gap on the age for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Babies to big babies.
So many people were talking about vaping in 2014 that vape was the Oxford Dictionary word of the year, which says a lot. I think this past year, 10 years later, the word was brain rot.
I was going to say brat. So what's happening, Rebecca? Where's the FDA on this? The government should be acting swiftly and appropriately because they do so often. What the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, the playbook on this stuff was barely even collecting dust. It had been under 20 years since the tobacco MSA was settled. And for corporate gossip number 3, I'm going to put on my Sonia voice and say, what are you doing here without the FDA? So according to investigations by the New York Times, both the commissioner of the FDA, whose name is Dr. Margaret Hamburg, and the director of the CDC, Dr. Thomas Frieden, were both sounding the alarms about the risk of e-cigarette use as early as 2008. Remember, this is when like 1% of high schoolers are smoking e-cigarettes and 0.6% of middle schoolers or less. So whenever they tried to regulate, there were lawsuits by tobacco companies that were upheld by judges that pushed them off. And then in 2016, this is during Obama's final year in office, a proposal to ban flavored e-cigarettes was rejected because of a mountain of lobbying against the measure. Lobbyists say, vaping is good for the economy. And it's funny when you see people legitimately try to weigh public health against the economy. Like, do you remember during the pandemic when that guy went on TV and was like, old people should be willing to go to work and die for the economy? It's like sometimes we have to make hard choices. And I think that like people's lives should win. But what am I? Again, didn't go to Stanford. So when Trump took office in 2016, the FDA commissioner, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who himself was very concerned about this growing epidemic, ended up giving the vape companies 4 years to, quote, prove that the public health benefits of their products outweighed the risk, which basically left companies like Juul's just in like kind of a regulatory gray area. Suffice it to say, the FDA was a little behind the ball. But we'll put a pin in that. Scott Gottlieb and the FDA are going to come back in the story and kind of have their revenge towards the end.
Yeah, hopefully this is a learning experience for the FDA, right? Where as we get deeper into the story, we really realize how slow the government moves and like the impact of bureaucracy. At one point, the government extends a regulatory review by 4 years from 2018 to 2022 and basically gives vape companies 4 years to operate with no rules.
I know.
It's a really, really good representation of how slowly the government works.
I struggle to fully blame it on bureaucrats and the government when there is an army of lobbyists fighting them and lawyers fighting them at every turn. So I think it kind of does go hand in hand because you also have all these politicians who are now working against you because Big Vape has convinced them that this is bad for the economy for some reason. So let's move to corporate gossip number 4. Let's go back to the inner workings of Juul. And corporate gossip number 4 is, while the FDA takes a well-deserved mid-decade nap, Richard Mumby becomes Juul's Don Draper. So here's Richard Mumby. And this is my favorite part of the story because it's very, very, very silly. So I'm going to introduce a new character to you called Richard Mumby. And he was brought in to run the company's marketing department. And I don't know how to describe this guy other than like he's the parody of a startup marketing executives. He's doing what 19-year-old boys dream of doing when they take an intro to advertising class in college. He's University of Michigan undergraduate, Dartmouth MBA, Bain consultant. He works at these like quintessential millennial brands, Gilt Group and Bonobos, before he joins Juul. And this is him with The Weeknd at an event for the precursor to Juul, which is PAX. But you know, he's a good looking guy. And I can totally see why, you know, in the book, they talk about him having a real cult of personality around him. Everybody loved what this guy has to say. It reminds me a little bit of Gary Vaynerchuk.
Gary V!
All of his ideas were just immediately greenlit.
When I wake up in the morning, I picture my entire family dead. And then I realize they're not dead. And now I have a great day.
I think his quote was, every morning, wake up, you get in the shower, make pretend your mom got shot in the face. I love this story. Here's a quote. One former sales employee remembers Mumby sidling up to him at a company event and talking shop. Quote, stay in touch with me, Mumby told him. Let me know everything that's going on out there. I want you to be my eyes and ears. This employee did not know Mumby, had never met him, had no idea why he singled him out. This guy needs to be checked for brain rot. Like, are you acting in a play?
And then after he said that, he said, I want you to be my eyes and ears. And then he put a scoop of beans on his tray and moved down to the next person. Sounds like a crazy cafeteria lady.
My eyes and ears? Like, where did you get this from? At the time, Juul had hired a creative agency called Cult Collective. Mumby and the team go to hear the pitch in Canada. And luckily for us, the deck that was pitched to them is public because it was later included in a legal complaint by the Massachusetts Attorney General. So sit back, relax, and imagine that you're in a boardroom listening to this brain buster. And Mike is going to play our advertising executive, giving us a pitch.
Juul is the kind of transformation that only a tech company can bring about. Short of trying one, the best way to point out the dramatic difference that the technology in Juul can bestow and the dated idiocy of analog cigarettes and existing vapor products is by illustrating the other intelligent evolutions that smarter thinking and technology have provided mankind. The comparison is childishly easy.
It's giving college presentation. It's giving me when they say I have to hit a word limit. He trashes it, and he calls up his friend from Bonobos, who is an art director and photographer named Stephen Braley. He billed himself as a, quote, creative director / troublemaker. That is so 2011, who had previously worked for MTV. He asked this guy, He asked this guy to connect with the advertising agency and create a new pitch. And here's the first mood board. Again, and we have this artifact thanks to the legal filings. What do you guys see when you see this one?
This is an American Apparel ad
Yeah.
with crotch shots and bright colors.
Yes. Very young. There's like a guy, a naked, really ripped guy, a girl with red lipstick that's smeared for some reason, a straight up crotch shot, and for some strange reason, a chihuahua in front of the girl's private areas. It's basically a full ripoff of American Apparel.
Yeah.
Mumby loved it. And like everything Mumby loved, it got the green light. The campaign would be called Vaporized, and it would have images of models who, to my eyes, are hovering around 18 years old, looking very cool and very aspirational with their e-cigarettes. And the idea, according to Juul's PR director, was that, quote, Juul single-handedly had made e-cigarettes cool. And here's the final product. So again, really young people. There's this kind of parallelogram decoration around the Juul, and it just looks very like high-tech and cool in that 2013 way. And when you compare that to, say, the old tobacco advertisements that were targeted towards young people, the type of advertising that was prohibited after 1998, these ads are basically the same. Like if you go down and look at these Newport ads and these Escort cigarettes ads, it's the same vibe.
Yeah, it's funny. I think this Vaporized campaign really shows me that not even the advertiser understands the product. Like, not once have I seen a Juul smoker hold the Juul in between pointer and middle finger. Like, you hold it with your finger and thumb and you fucking rip it.
Or you hold it in your fist.
Or your fist.
Fist. Yeah. Like, they were just like, make it look like a cigarette, and they basically copied, to your point, these old campaigns.
But you know, Adam and James are saying, come on, guys. This isn't a tobacco company. This is a tech company. Do people skateboard at the offices of a tobacco company? I don't think so. Nice try. And plus, those models are over 21, we think. So we're in the clear. Oh, what's that? Lawyers say that they found records of Juul sending PR packages to social media influencers with a large number of underage followers. Give me that. Give me that paper. That's right. There was a Juul influencer program that works exactly how any other influencer program works. Juul would send influencers codes for free Juuls with the hopes that they'd use the vapes in social media posts. Here are some people who were targeted. Maybe you follow them. Celebrities like Jennifer Lawrence, Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson. I mean, 2013, you literally could not get bigger millennial stars. And Claudia Oshry, aka Girl with No Job, aka the Toast, half of the Toast. Wow. She was 23 and she had over 2.3 million Instagram followers at the time, and she also received Juul's Juul pods. They also threw a launch party in the meatpacking district for all the influencers. I wasn't there. Here's a screen grab from Guest of a Guest, which is a blog about New York City parties. It's like the millennial version of Page Six. By the way, did you know have you ever heard of Guest of a Guest?
No.
I mean, if you were in New York in the 2010s, you knew about it, but I didn't know that it was co-founded by one of the Winklevoss twins.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this blog post was, we got #vaporized inside the Juul launch party, and you can kind of see pictures, and over 400 New York movers and shakers representing a cool downtown vibe had a great time, said the blog post. Apparently, Kyle Cook from Summer House was there. I couldn't find a picture of him.
He doesn't remember it.
According to filings, over 200 of those attendees posted pictures from the party on their social media pages. Later, the CDC would report that by 2016, remember we talked about those middle schoolers? 70% of middle and high schoolers regularly saw e-cigarette ads. So now people inside Juul were sounding alarm bells. They're like, guys, are we like not supposed to advertise to kids? Haven't you told investors that this wasn't a product for kids, that it was an alternative to current adult smokers? This is like not that. But Mumby didn't want to advertise to 30 and 40-year-old existing smokers. Ew! Blah! Ah!
What am I going to invite to my party? Fred fucking Savage? No. I want Claudia Oshry. Serena fucking Kerrigan. And what Mumby says goes. According to one former employee, quote, Mumby was kind of running the company at the time. To be honest, though, I think as much as Mumby does deserve a lot of snark, like the consequences of Juul going down this path doesn't 100% fall on his shoulders. There were board meetings going on. There were other executives. There were advisors. Anybody could have stepped in and used one single brain cell. Literally less than a minute of critical thought would have understood the risks of this campaign. According to the book Big Vape, Pritzker and other investors did voice concern that the campaign was, quote, too young, but it was after the campaign had gone live.
See, I think you're giving them too much or not enough credit. I think that they're actively aware that they're advertising to kids.
No, I agree. I think that they are. I
the
think
board, everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not fully his fault. It's not Mumby's fault.
Oh, but you're saying use one brain cell. Like they knew what they were doing. I think that they didn't. My opinion is that they all 100% knew what was going on. They knew they were advertising to kids. They knew kids were going to get hooked. That just meant more money for them. This is not why didn't somebody step in? Like, nobody wanted to step in because this was dollar signs.
Yes, I agree with you.
Plain and simple.
I agree with you. And we're going to talk about the fact that they likely were like, oh, this is really a bad idea, but we're ultimately making a ton of money. And
don't
like
hit
we
send.
said,
Don't hit send. Oops, I hit send.
Oh no, we advertise. It's like Willy Wonka when Augustus Gloop goes into the chocolate.
No, please stop.
Don't advertise to kids. Yeah, I mean it's insane. I mean, but the fact it is crazy that not a single person put the stops to this. It just goes to show you, like, if you do not have strong values, that you absolutely will sacrifice anything and everything for money. I mean, look, like, were they so mesmerized by the idea of getting an audience with Kyle Cook that they were just blind to the hazards? I mean, I met the guy. He's really charming. I get it. Or, you know, like Mike is saying, did they just consider whatever consequences that would come as a cost of doing business? Is it just like fail fast?
Yeah, bingo. And who is going to tell them no? Not the FDA,
yeah,
right?
You're absolutely right. Nobody's there to tell them no. But, like, imagine if you're a doctor or an educator or somebody in public health and you're walking down the streets of New York City and seeing these tobacco billboards targeted towards young kids. Like, they are outraged. These advertising campaigns felt like they were, like, taunting. And the already very heated debate over youth vaping started to boil over. So why don't we take a break here, hit the vape, and we'll be back for Corporate Gossip number 5. Corporate Gossip number 5 is, can't talk right now, I'm blitzscaling. Blitzscaling. Trying to go for a Steph Tolev. Can you give us one?
Blitzscaling.
We're blitzscaling. I'll give it to Mumby. His campaign worked in the same way that it worked a half a century before him. After the vaporizer campaign, Juul's sales absolutely explode. Even eventually the board replaces Juul's founders with proper CEO, and then they scrap him and they replace him with another CEO, and this one's from Big Yogurt.
Big culture.
We've met this guy before. This is Kevin Burns, who formerly worked at Chobani, and I think now works at Chobani again. And we'll talk about this at the end, but it did give me some pause because obviously Chobani was one of our good episodes, and we'll find out in this story that, like, Kevin Burns isn't necessarily, like, the best of CEOs in my opinion. So it just definitely gave me some pause because, and it's, I think, one of the reasons why we kind of stopped doing those good episodes, because we just realized, like, everything is just such a tangled web of bullshit.
Yeah. Kevin Burns gives individual contributor vibes.
Yeah, big time. So back to Kevin Burns. He formerly worked at Chobani, and then he was hired to become the new CEO of Juul. His mission? Turn Juul into a big boy company. More lawyers, more publicists, more lobbyists, and of course, every corporate villain's golden goose, international expansion. This is really the goal for any startup. Those investors want to see something called blitzscaling, and Adam kind of previewed this last week on our episode. But this is a term coined by LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman, and it basically means prioritize speed and growth over efficiency. grow and gain market share as fast as possible. Gobble up the market, right? MBAs and venture capitalists love blitzscaling because it is the quickest way to get a return on investment. They don't want to see you with steady growth, 10% a year over the next couple of years. They want 100% every year for the next 3 years, and then we're going to sell.
I think I was just trying to think of a good example of somebody who's blitzscaling right now, like something that's everywhere, and I think it's that company Built Rewards.
Yes, that's a great example.
They are everywhere, and I'm just thinking, like, it's unclear what they do. I mean, I know you can get rewards from paying your rent. Started by a guy whose dad is a billionaire, but they are everywhere right now. At least in New York. Yeah. I assume they're everywhere else.
Anytime you see a company that's offering, like, especially a startup company that's offering obscene discounts, like the reason that Uber was so cheap for so long is because they were blitzscaling, right? So it used to be incredibly cheap to get from Queens to Midtown. It used to be $15, and then you could do Uber Pool and get there for like $7. And then what happens is they absolutely gobble up the market. They decimate the taxi industry. And now it's just as expensive to Uber from Queens to Midtown as it is to taxi, right? They have added no value. But what they've done is they've made early investors in Uber very rich. So,
But Becca, just a moment. Isn't the goal of a startup investor to fund innovative products that improve life for users and to make new jobs and grow the economy?
But Becca, isn't the goal of a start? Shut up. No. The goal is to blitzscale and make a couple of people really rich. And here's the truth. This type of growth is really good if you're an executive or an early investor or an early employee of one of these companies. If you're a regular employee or a retail investor or an acquiring company, it's not as beneficial for you. And as you'll see, when companies grow this way, this fast, they're kind of creating a petri dish for sloppy work that can lead to massive financial headaches. That's why on this podcast, you've seen so many acquisitions become write-downs or IPOs that flop, because once you look under the covers, it's all just stinky garbage. Anyway, back to Juul. They're blitzscaling. Juul was growing. They sold 2.2 million vapes in 2016. And then in 2017, their sales increased 600%. It had more market share than all of their competitors combined.
Blitzscale!
To manage demand, Juul was practically pulling people off the streets to work for them. Here's a quote from Big Vape, quote, "Sometimes when it came to hiring, quantity outranked quality. There were people that were in management and leadership positions that should not have been there, but there was nobody else to fill the spot. Employees were working 14, 15 hours a day, 6 days a week."
A handful of times, they hired multiple people for a singular role. I read a few stories about people being hired without a desk or a boss. Over the course of a 2-year period, Juul went from about 200 employees in San Francisco to 4,000 in over 20 countries. Blitzscale!
At one point, Juul made a modification to its existing device to fix a long-standing problem where vape juice was leaking into users' mouths. Under the regulations that existed at the time, the company should have alerted the FDA about the fix. But according to internal sources, quote, Juul's top executives didn't yet understand how carefully the FDA's policies should have been followed.
Blitzscale!
At one point, demand was so high that when a distributor returned a batch of pods to the company that were over a year old, which is old enough for their quality to be compromised, Burns allegedly authorized their resale anyway. And then, having already saturated the youth market, Juul went to South Dakota to meet with the Native American tribal leaders to pitch them to switch to Juul. Blitzscale! Then they tried to expand into Europe, but seemingly did no market research, so their product completely flopped. Why? Because Europeans don't have the same social stigma around smoking that Americans do. So there wasn't really a consumer desire to switch to vapes. And then Burns, who went to Horton,
was also obsessed with selling in China. And this is like every business boy's golden goose. But the China National Tobacco Corporation basically runs a monopoly on the industry. So he instructed the team to set up an entire operation to sell Juul direct to customers from Alibaba. It was like putting your shit on Facebook Marketplace. Their listings were pulled by whoever controls the internet in China shortly thereafter.
BLITZSCALED.
And they still have this pesky problem. Those uptight nerd dweebs, doctors and parents and public health officials that were giving Juul shit about kids getting hooked on their vapes. So in 2017, Juul hatched a plan, and they would start a youth education campaign and go
to get kids to understand how cool it is. That was the first plan. Fail.
Close. Go into schools themselves to teach anti-vaping curriculum. And they'd make a big show of it by publicly asking for increased regulation, but only the kind we like.
I've got a particularly scary story that takes place just north of this very studio. So in 2018, this kid, Caleb Berkman, who lives on Manhattan's Upper West Side, was visited by one of these Juul reps. The rep told Caleb and other students that Juul wasn't for them. It was for people who could smoke and as a smoking alternative, but it was perfectly safe. Many of the kids were relieved because they had already been smoking Juul and they thought, they didn't want to die and they didn't want to have cancer or whatever, right? After the presentation, Caleb approaches the rep and says, hey, one of my friends is really addicted to nicotine. What would you recommend to that? And he says, he should switch to Juul, not realizing that Caleb was talking about a friend who was addicted to nicotine through Juul. Here's the quote. The rep replied, he should use Juul. It's 99% safer than cigarettes. The man took out a Juul out of his pocket and showed the boys how it worked. This is the iPhone of vapes. Caleb went home and told his mother, Meredith, and she raised hell on the Upper West Side. She would go on to find the advocacy group Parents Against E-Cigarettes, or PAVE.
That's insane. I mean, to go to a school and be like, this isn't for you, but if you are going to use them, they're perfectly safe, which is not true, as we're going to find out.
You know what this reminds me of? Sean William Scott's, whatever his name's character in Role Models, where he shows up and he's like trying to get the kids to switch to energy drinks, but it's like pissed drunk and hungover the entire time.
And his pee is like bright green.
His pee is like bright yellow. Yeah, it's like that's the guy who I'm imagining is the Juul representative.
Get ready to have your dreams dashed, kids, because nothing's going to work out the way you think it's going to. Gin. By the way, this stuff's poison.
So, yeah, that's what they did, right? They go to these schools, whatever, pissed drunk, hungover. The youth campaign was a complete flop, and the material that they used was also allegedly lifted from the work of a Stanford professor who had no knowledge of the program. And anyone who was following the company knew that the show and dance that they did was just for regulators, was a PR stunt. They still sent their army of lobbyists to Capitol Hill to push for their company-friendly laws. And all of these efforts were for show. The company needed to improve their image in order to keep growing. And what did they want to do? Blitzscale. They wanted to grow at all costs. So I think you're going to take us through the next corporate.
Are you ready for the next point of corporate gossip?
I think I'm ready.
This one I'm calling The Real House Husbands of San Mateo County. So Rebecca or Mike, are you guys familiar with Atherton, California?
I'm not.
No? Okay, let me paint you a picture. So Atherton sits just outside of San Francisco. It's about 18 miles northwest of San Jose. It's known for having the highest concentration of wealth between 1990 and 2019. To give you an idea, the median home prices are $8 million. With just 10,000 residents, some of its most notable include NBA star Steph Curry, friend of the podcast, Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape and general partner of Andreessen Horowitz, and the one-time home of Paul Allen, who's the deceased co-founder of Microsoft.
By the way, Mark Andreessen, one of my favorite quotes since Trump was elected, that he woke up and he said, I feel like all of a sudden, since Trump has been elected, that a boot has been lifted off my neck and I can finally breathe again.
Yes.
And you guys should Google Mark Andreessen. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Or his home in Atherton. and see how harsh that boot is on his neck.
Seriously.
So anyway, the list keeps on going in Atherton. It's a who's who of Silicon Valley. Think of it as the Beverly Hills or Beverly Flats of tech. For this story, let's just concentrate on Pete Bridger, one of her house husbands. So Bridger is the founder of a private equity fund, Fortress Investment Group. Bridger is a billionaire a few times over himself and has a very cushy life in Atherton. His daughter, Emma, was a budding lacrosse star at Sacred Heart, where tuition runs a cool $50,000 a year.
This is a high school.
This is a private high school. So Peter was up in arms when his daughter informed him of a budding problem on the lacrosse field. Emma's teammates were juuling.
My perfect child, my perfect daughter,
Yes.
smoking cigarettes?
Yes, they were juuling any chance they could get. And it was starting to impact the team's performance, and Emma was not happy. So Emma goes to her coach and she says, "Coach, they're juuling. We have to stop this." Coach says, "There's no way. There's no way, Emma."
Emma's
so
a
Emma
narc.
Emma's a huge narc. Yeah. The coach quickly draws a line in the sand and says, "All right, if there's any more vaping, you guys will be kicked off the team." A few weeks later, they have a tournament in Denver, which they all fly to, which I guess happens. I've never traveled in high school for a tournament. Anyway, they're in Denver, and during the tournament, several girls get caught juuling. They're kicked off the team.
In the basement of the Four Seasons.
In the basement of the Four Seasons, right? No, actually, it was in the skybox at the Colorado Avalanche game. Anyway, they get caught vaping, and they're sent home on first class flights that their parents paid for. No, I don't know, it was first class. But they were sent home sent packing on their parents' dime. Pete was shocked. How could these girls risk their future on this contraption?
Just wait until you see how much coke they're gonna do in college. It's gonna literally blow your mind. And how much Adderall they're probably on now. It's unreal. Just a little bit of meth is fine, but the second you suck on a vape, it's done for you.
Why would the girls put themselves at risk like this? They're addicted. He surmised. Not in my backyard. Peter enlisted the help of another house husband, fellow one percenter David Burke, founder and CEO of McKenna Capital, a $20 billion fund. Burke goes as far as to send Kevin Burns a scathing LinkedIn message. Burke's LinkedIn message reads, "Kevin, I believe we're both in the same Atherton community near Stanford. I just wanted to let you know that your stupid fucking company has gotten my teenage kids' friends hooked on nicotine. From here on out, I'm going to go out of my way to fight the bullshit that you're all doing over there, and will be more than vocal about it. I have deep ties in the investment world, and am from Washington, D.C., and have ties there, all of which I will leverage to the max. I hope you feel really great about making lots of money for yourselves under the guise of helping under the guise of helping old conventional smokers kick the habit, while you hook a whole new generation on something that a decade from now we'll all know the truth about, just as things played out with the conventional smoking. You'll have a beautiful, proud legacy for you and your family to celebrate in future generations. Best, David Burke."
I don't mean to be dramatic, but did he just threaten a CEO?
Even worse. Burns doesn't respond. Left on red.
Left on red?
Homeboy's so pissed he posts on LinkedIn.
That's crazy. When he sent that, he was like, "Now, according to everything else in my life, people do exactly what I say when I want them to. So problem fixed. Don't worry, honey. Got it all under control. I sent a LinkedIn message on your behalf."
So together, Burke and Bridger, our two house husbands, have billions of dollars, power, and connections. I like to call this a real grassroots movement. And they would have you believe so too. This was a bad combination for Juul. The two of them would partner with another Stanford alumni, booster, and family of another billionaire, Tom Steyer's brother, Jim, who is a billionaire hedge fund founder. Steyer founded several children's advocacy groups, along with Common Sense Media, which, do you know?
Common Sense Media. That
sounds
really familiar.
So Steyer then starts looking into the issue, and he polls his college-age kid and was flabbergasted with the impact of Juul. His son said, People Juul in your class at Stanford, and you don't even know it. Steyer went on the offensive. By fall of 2018, a formidable group of wealthy parents whose children had fallen prey to Juul, from Atherton to San Francisco to New York City, began forming a coalition to stop the company. So this is so funny to me. This whole story is so funny, and we cackled about this when I was first telling you about it, because it's like the people of Atherton live off of companies like Juul.
Exactly.
And they make them possible. They're part of a system.
And this guy's a private equity investor. Like, I just did a quick Google and found that he's buying out senior living facilities. Like, you give a shit now suddenly because it's impacting your daughter. Like, look in the fucking mirror, my guy. Like, I could do like probably 20 more minutes of research and just see all the damage that you've done. But the moment that it impacts you, you're ready to fire off a LinkedIn message. It's giving slacktivism, if I can be honest.
The hypocrisy is palatable. And the main thing is, right, we're okay making money, but don't bring it into my well-manicured, well-fed backyard.
Right. And it's like, it's the cognitive dissonance that we talked about in the beginning. It's interesting to see the downstream gossip, right? Mm-hmm. Excellent find. Corporate gossip number 7 is CEO Kevin Burns wins big. So in December 2018, all that blitz scaling finally paid off when Altria, which is the company that was formerly known as Philip Morris, bought a 35% stake in Juul for $12.8 billion, with $2 billion set aside for employees. Payouts reportedly average $1.3 million per person, but I'd like to know the median, because I think an average is kind of misleading, because I think most of that money went to the founders, Adam and James, and its current CEO, Kevin Burns. A lot of this buyout money went to existing Juul shareholders as well. Reportedly, only $300 million of the $12.8 billion was invested in the company.
I know, that was crazy when I noted that too. The number I saw was like 200 million. Wow. Even less. So according to the employee stories, this was so similar to the AOL Time Warner windfall that those employees got. Juul employees were required to continue employment to receive payments in installment. Remember the AOL Time Warner seminar, How to Motivate Your Millionaire Employee?
Yes.
Juul was dealing with literally the same exact thing. They called themselves Julianaires.
Wow.
So the Julianaires are snatching up real estate, boats, and luxury vehicles all over the Bay Area.
Maybe they were rich, but for some of these employees, with a moral compass, the Philip Morris buyout was kind of a bummer. This was a startup with the stated goal of transitioning traditional cigarette users off of cigarettes. But to be bought now by one of the biggest tobacco companies in the world felt like the opposite. Those parents, doctors, public health officials were also raging because now the association between Juul and Philip Morris was just too much. Do you remember Scott Gottlieb at the FDA? We said he was going to get his revenge. Well, he was pissed when he heard the news. Juul had been going on and on and on about how they were not big tobacco, but now they literally were big tobacco.
So yeah, Gottlieb gets completely played. He opened his doors to Juul and Altria execs prior to the deal. He held impromptu office hours to talk about impending regulation and how the companies could work together with the government. Altria and Juul used Gottlieb's kindness as weakness. They got all the information they could, and then weaseled their way through the possible regulations and crafted a deal to blow it all up.
Yeah. They played him hard. And he said to them, he wrote, "No other company that I have worked with at the FDA behaves the way that you do. No other industry that we regulate that behaves the way that you did, where you come in and you make representations that you want to work with us on a critical public health problem, and then you consistently go around us. The first thing you do is go to the White House and complain about what we're doing. No other company operates this way." And they said, "Who are you again?" "We're billionaires. Shut up, Gottlieb." Anyway, so ready for corporate gossip number 8?
Yes.
What's the opposite of blitzscale? When you fail really, really fast? I think that's called a hyperflop. So this is the last last piece of corporate gossip. So the reason why I hate and I love this story is right here, because we're about to get to the part where Juul just goes completely off the rails and into the ditch and then further down into the mud. And it's supposed to feel good now because the bad guys lose. But it's also not that good because the bad guys got really rich losing. But what are we going to do? You know, they get to be rich and we get to laugh at them, and laugh we will. So remember how I said that Blitzscale was great until the acquisition actually happens? I'm now going to present to you the comedy of errors that is post-acquisition Juul, starting in summer 2019, and I'm just going to rattle them off because I think it's funnier that way. All right, May 2019, North Carolina's Josh Stein becomes the first attorney general, among many more, to sue Juul, arguing that the company had violated fair trade practices by purposely trying to attract and addict underage users with flashy advertising. 2 months later, July 2019, U.S. public opinion ratings were measured for Juul lower than those for oil and gas companies like Exxon. That same month, the company started an internal and an external rebrand. Morale was in the shitter among the existing employees, so they brought them all together for a company rah-rah session, a youth vaping prevention meetup at one of the Pritzker family Hyatt hotels. The conference ran out of food, the speakers were late, and the chief human resources officer got on the stage in front of bored and hungry and pissed off employees and, quote, galloped around the ballroom to California Love, a song that the book points out was released after Tupac spent much of 1995 in prison for a sexual assault conviction. Here's a quote from an employee that was there, quote, "For her to come out to that song, white as hell, to Tupac at a youth prevention convention was so effing inappropriate. My mind was blown." That same month, July 2019, executives at Juul call up the NYU School of Global Public Health asking the dean if she could send them instructions on, quote, how to get kids off nicotine. Her response, and I'm paraphrasing here, is, "There is no known treatment, you dumb fucks," and hung up the phone.
I think that was a real quote.
Yeah. Then in August 2019, so a month later, the CDC announces that it's investigating a, quote, cluster of pulmonary illnesses linked to e-cigarette product use. Basically, kids were showing up at hospitals, some needing double lung transplants or dying because of allegedly the toxic fumes that they had ingested. It wasn't known at the time whether Juul vapes were the culprit. In fact, it actually turned out not to be the case, but it sufficiently freaked everyone out enough to either give up or significantly cut back on their vaping. Do you remember this? It was called like popcorn lung or something.
Oh, yeah, I remember popcorn lung.
Yeah. Then a month later, in September 2019, Burns is fired and Altria put one of their guys in the top spot. 2 months later, in November 2019, more than 600 employees were laid off, and Altria wrote down the investment by $4.5 billion. Blitzscale. All right, you ready for the aftermath?
Yes.
So states and others started suing Juul, resulting in about a $1.7 billion payout to settle those lawsuits. The money went to individuals and institutions like high schools, and some people who signed up for the class action lawsuit received as much as $3,000.
Me!
You got money from this?
I got $25
Wow!
via Venmo.
That's awesome.
Yeah, via Venmo. It was weird.
That's very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember seeing on TikTok a lot of people being like, I just got $3,000 randomly. So that's cool. Juul was briefly pulled off the market in 2022, but the FDA paused the ban after a lawsuit was filed. Today, Juul and other cigarettes are still available in stores across the country in a limited number of flavors. Regulations around the kid-friendly flavors, so not menthol or tobacco flavors, are still kind of up in the air, with the FDA battling both the right-leaning U.S. Supreme Court and the powerful tobacco lobby. Either way, in 2022, the company that was once valued as high as $38 billion was worth $450 million. So that's like 99%.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I can't seem to get, wait, is that right? 99%?
I
can't
mean,
do, or it's either,
it's a loss of $37.5 billion.
how about that? I can't seem to get a more recent figure of the current Juul valuation because it's owned by Altria. But either way, it's fucking low. Altria actually stole its stake and it bought rival company Enjoy in 2023. So what's next for Juul? A September 2024 headline from the Washington Post says that Trump vows to, quote, save vaping after private meeting with vaping lobbyists. So I don't know Trump's take on vaping. I'd actually, frankly, be very curious what RFK has to say about this. I can't imagine he's pro-vaping.
I'm sure the boys are vaping.
Yeah. So WAPO reported that the biggest corporate donor to the primary pro-Trump super PAC is a subsidiary of Reynolds, which is the second largest tobacco company in the world. So I would say watch this space. So here are my takeaways. Like, when I think about addiction, I couldn't help but thinking throughout this entire story, when I thought about the tobacco master settlement agreement and then the massive, $1.7 billion settlement from Juul, that I see a lot of similarities to TikTok and Meta and the addictions that people currently have with their smartphones and the way that it's genuinely impacting their brain functionality, the way that it's impacting kids. I would honestly put money on in 15, 20 years us having like a master settlement agreement with social media companies and YouTube, because like we should not have YouTube for kids. Like, I've seen kids on YouTube and I'm like looking at the way that they're interacting with this compared to another toy, and I'm just like, that doesn't seem normal. So I'll save that for maybe our Patreon episode where I get deeper into that. But I do think it's interesting to think about these master settlement agreements, especially when we think about like the increasing power of corporations and the things that they know, but they are acting against that knowledge. So when we think about like climate change and all these other things, what do those master settlement agreements look like? And is there a world in which we have the proper people in government who are able to negotiate those master settlement agreements from corporations? Because like, aside from taxing the rich, that's a huge way that you can get a massive cash infusion from these corporations who have come about those gains illegally or immorally. So that's one of the things that I couldn't help but think as we went through this episode. But what do you think?
Yeah. When I read your note about the master settlement for social media, I thought it was really interesting because I'd never thought about it. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? Yeah, I could totally see that happening. I would just, my mind was like, how do you quantify what each person's takeaway is from social media? Like, how much have I been impacted by social media, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's for the...
You're right. I don't know. That's where I naturally
That's where the
went.
jury decides.
Yeah, right?
Because
they can quantify how many Juuls I bought from my purchase history. That's how I got in on that settlement, was I had a receipt from Juul. Anyway, yeah, I love this. I thought this was great. This was...
Yeah, I think this was another one of your ideas. So
this was another one of them. I'll take full credit for it. Yeah, I thought this was a fantastic story, and this is one that I think schools, if the schools that are listening can.
Yeah, and what a tremendous takedown of blitzscaling, huh?
Seriously, eat that, Reed.
It is crazy. It's like, of course, like growing, and this is where like when companies are just like, we need cash flow and we need revenue and profit above all else. It's like, of course you want that. You're the fucking CEO and you have 4 more years here before you cash out and go fuck everybody on your yacht. But what about the rest of us? And I think it is normal and it is okay to push back against profit at any cost. And you shouldn't feel stupid for saying like, hey, maybe we don't go so fast. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who are kind of been like, well, that's not how business, like I've been in meetings where I've kind of said as much. And the response that I get back is, oh, that's not how business works, you dumb fuck. And I'm just like, okay, well, maybe it should, because this clearly isn't working. Because if blitzscaling is so great, then explain to me why this company is now worth $450 million from $38 billion. Like, what am I missing here?
Well, also, I'd love for somebody to do this, and I'm sure somebody has done the research, but the shareholder value lost by blitzscaling.
Yes. The shareholder value.
23andMe.
Like, be honest, because if you're just going to say that we're blitzscaling to benefit these 15 to 30 people, then fine. But be honest about that, because me as a shareholder, that doesn't really get my go. You know what I mean? Me as an employee, that doesn't really get me going. So be honest. Are you blitzscaling to improve the lives of 30 people, or are you actually trying to create a sustainable business model? Yeah, I think we should end it there.
Let's end it there.
We're going to do a quick outfit change, and we'll be back to do the good news of the episode. All right, now it's time for the part of the program where we give you some good news. And, you know, there always is good news. We just have to find it, right? So we actually have a good news correspondent now, and her name is Elizabeth Liu, and we're so excited to have her on the team. This report she filed last week, so I'm going to read it now. Over 5,000 healthcare workers are currently on strike across 8 Oregon hospitals owned by Providence Health and Services. Those picketing include nurses, nurse practitioners, and physicians, and this is the largest healthcare strike in the state's history. The strike comes after a year of failed contract negotiations where the Oregon Nurses Association Union demanded improved staffing levels, raised wages, and adequate healthcare benefits. The ONA strike comes alongside an increased unionization within the healthcare industry, with many workers feeling overwhelmed since the pandemic. The strike's strongest bargaining power comes in the form of over 70 physicians who have actually joined the picket line as well. Providence has been unable to find adequate replacements for those striking physicians, which cost the Providence system millions of dollars. Dr. Jennifer Lincoln is one of those physicians who has joined the picket line, and she says, "I can say as a physician who worked during the last limited nursing strike, it was not easy, and it was not the same. So I know we need to support one another." ONA has also gathered the support of the Oregon community, with many influential members voicing their support for the strike. Several senators and representatives have also joined the picket line and signed an open letter to Providence asking them to return to the table. 92% of Providence's patients support the strike, citing the current difficulties with understaffing in the hospitals. For those healthcare workers, this strike is not just about the money. It's about providing adequate conditions to give their patients the best care possible. So thank you, Elizabeth Liu, for that report. And then we actually have an update as of 15 hours ago, as I'm recording this on February 3rd. The update is Providence Medical Group announced a tentative deal with doctors and nurses and other providers who work at Providence Women's Clinic. So this is at least a portion of the nurses that are striking. Here's what they've achieved. An experience-based wage scale that gives nurses a 4 to 20% pay increase, extra money for night shifts, more funding for professional development, and new procedures to make sure time deducted from leave is accurate, which it's kind of insane that there wasn't procedures in place to make sure that that was accurate. But anyway, at this time, there are still thousands of healthcare workers on strike at other Oregon hospitals, but still, this is a huge step in the right direction, especially as Trump and Musk target the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB. So hopefully that gave you something to smile about today. I know it's been tough, but we're always going to look for these good news stories. So if you have any leads or ideas, you can actually email Elizabeth. I put her email in the show notes. And thanks again for her work, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thanks for tuning in for another juicy episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. If you want to follow us on Instagram or on TikTok, we are at Corporate Gossip Pod. If you want to email me or Adam, it's Becca@nighttoast.com or Adam@nighttoast.com. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by buying us a coffee, or if you want extra access to another 2 episodes per month, you can sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/corporate gossip. We will see you in 2 weeks with a very timely episode about the trial of Charlie Javis, who is the Forbes 30 Under 30 award winner who scammed JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon out of $170 million at last count. And her trial is going on next week. So I'm going to hopefully get into the courtroom and give you guys some hot off the press, extremely salacious drama that I heard with my own ears. So I'm excited for that. Otherwise, I'll see you next week if you are a member of the Patreon. Talk soon. Bye.